Hello, everyone, and welcome to Webinar Wednesday with FPSA. We're very glad you could join us. One of the things we hear consistently from our members is the challenge of balancing productivity, workforce development, and operational performance. So we're excited to explore that topic with you today. Today's sponsor is WorkForge, a learning and development partner built specifically for food manufacturers and OEMs. WorkForge helps companies develop skilled, safe, and productive employees from the day they're hired to the day they retire. By combining over 900 e-learning courses, career pathways, custom training content for your unique processes and equipment, and a manufacturing-focused LMS. WorkForge gives teams the structure and visibility they need to reduce turnover, strengthen compliance, and build real capability on the floor. Today's presenter is David Gregory, a favorite resource of FPSA. He is the Director of Learning and Development at Weber Incorporated. Weber Incorporated is a subsidiary of Weber Food Technologies, where Dave champions a shift from check-the-box training to productivity-driven learning. He leads initiatives that accelerate speed to proficiency, strengthen leadership capability, and directly support Weber's brand promise of delivering the perfect portion for customers. Dave specializes in translating strategy into execution through evidence-based learning, adult learning principles, and behavior-anchored performance models. His work spans leadership development, technical capability building, talent management, and organizational performance. We're excited to have you with us, Dave, today to present maximizing operational performance, aligning equipment, processes, and people. Thank you, Dave. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. As Jennifer said, my name is Dave Gregory. I'm with Weber Academy. And today we're going to discuss something that is, in my opinion, becoming one of the most important competitive differentiators in manufacturing and food processing. And that is how organizations are maximizing operational performance by aligning equipment, processes, and people. For many years, and you probably experienced this in your own businesses, manufacturing has focused heavily on machines. It's what we do, right? Automation and technology. And those things matter significantly. But the organizations winning today are organizations developing people faster, applying learning better, and sustaining performance longer. And so today's discussion is about moving beyond traditional training and towards measurable productivity improvement. I'm excited to share some of these concepts with you. And just by way of introduction from Jennifer, you heard I lead learning and development for Weber Inc. and Weber Academy. Our responsibility is supporting human performance for both internal teams at Weber as well as our external customers. At Weber, we custom design, manufacture, install, and service full line food processing solutions. And as you heard Jennifer say, our brand promise is this idea of producing the perfect portion. What that means is precision, quality, uptime, throughput, yield, and operational excellence. And our learning strategy has to support all of those different business outcomes. At Weber Academy, we really built Weber Academy around a new core idea that training should improve operational performance. In the past, we measured attendance, we measured completions, and we're shifting away from measuring those items as a way of looking at success. These certificates hanging on a wall are nice, but it's not performance. And what we mean by performance is how do we ensure that we're improving yield, reducing giveaway, improved throughput, higher uptime for your machines, faster troubleshooting, better operator confidence when they're operating machinery, reduce turnover in your teams, and how do you produce stronger leadership to lead all of those initiatives that are focused on performance? So our focus is really on people, process, and performance. And those things, to me, that's what leads to a higher level of profitability. At Weber Academy, we run programs like WeBadge, which is a certification pathway that we utilize internally. We also have built learning or lab factories where we can do advanced learning, where people can actually get hands-on equipment, and break fix might be a one way that you've heard people talk about it in the past. What we talk about is in these labs, how do you prevent those things from occurring? We also focus on simulation-based learning, and we partner with Workforge to help us do some of those things. We also integrate our LMS system, and we utilize Workforge's LMS system as well. We also are very focused on role-based development pathways. All of these things exist to connect learning directly to productivity and measurable operational results. Oftentimes, I've heard people say it's really hard to measure learning. And I would agree with that to a certain extent, but I would say it's the job of every learning and development professional to ensure that we're measuring the right things. And that's why we're focusing on performance and productivity as a way of recognizing that measurement. A couple of things that we're all faced with, pressures that I'm sure resonate with most of you. And one of those pressures is rising costs. When we think about how inflation has impacted our industry and whether that's fuel costs that we're experiencing today, hopefully those come down soon, labor shortages, right? Nobody in the sixth grade really raises their hand and says, I want to work in a food processing plant when I get older. And so, how do we find the right people that can work in our industry and will enjoy the work? That's how we reduce turnover, right? Is give them confidence in the work that they do. We also are faced with higher production expectations often, right? So when you think about productivity and you're never as good as your last year, right? It's always about how do we continuously improve and get faster in the things that we need to do. And we'll talk about that today. Then there's more complexity that's always being introduced, and whether that complexity is through AI or the technology that's being introduced, our move away from the need for labor, human labor, and how do we automate things, all of that creates much more complexity in our businesses. And then technology adoption and the faster technology is being adopted. From a learning and development perspective, it means that we have to help people gain confidence in the use of those technologies and do that while they're still needing to do their regular job. And so oftentimes when we think about the reaction that people have is, let's just buy more technology, we have to recognize that technology alone is not the driver of performance. Machines don't create productivity by themselves. People create productivity through how they operate, maintain, troubleshoot, optimize, and lead those around those systems. And so as we think about what's the most important things, the question that I ask is always, what are you doing to drive performance? It's the central question of not only today's webinar, but it's the central question to me of what our learning and development professionals should be asking, our operating professionals should be asking, is how are we going to drive performance better than tomorrow than we do today? And so the real answer to this, unfortunately, is it only happens through daily incremental improvement. It's the only sustainable way that any organization gets better. So it sounds simple, but operationally it's very hard. And for many organizations, it's still a relatively new thinking. A lot of companies are still operating with a very traditional training mindset, right? It's handbooks for employees, hand an employee a workbook and tell them to go figure it out. You might run a classroom session. You might tell people to go learn this. You might send them into the production environment with a mentor and expect that the mentor is going to teach them everything they need to know. We might take them through safety courses and tell them to be safe. And oftentimes, what I see is people hoping that performance improves, but not really focusing on what do they need to change to improve performance. Oftentimes, what we see is people wondering why their yield losses are continuing when they've done the training, right? We brought people into a classroom, we talked to them about how to measure yield. We did all of these training events, and yet yield didn't improve, right? Or giveaway still remains too high. Or we're having unplanned downtime events with our machinery. What's happening, right? If operators are struggling with consistency, sometimes the answer is, well, let's put them through more training. If we're just training them on the basics, then they're never going to be focused on the areas of productivity that they need to be focused on. And so oftentimes you'll see people get frustrated and turnover stays high. Supervisors often find themselves spending most of their day putting out fires, right? This idea of firefighting instead of focusing on how do they get their team to improve a little bit every single day. And so it's sort of a rhetorical question that we should all ask ourselves. But if training is really working, why aren't operational results improving faster? And oftentimes the answer to that is because the objective cannot simply be training completion. And we have often measured training in our industry. We did it at Weber, where we measured it based upon completion as well as based upon what people told us about the training. And so we would do what's referred to as a level one survey. And many of you have participated in level one surveys when you've done training in the past. It's the old questions about, did you like the content? Was this applicable to your job? Did you like the trainer? You might answer all of those things with a 4 out of 5 or even a 5 out of 5, but it doesn't mean that your productivity has improved. And so when we think about the right ways to measure training, it really is in our industry what I like to refer to as the holy grail. It's throughput, it's yield, machine availability time, and then also the ability to reduce giveaway. You might also measure things like quality and safety and reliability. You might even be more advanced and measure revenue per employee, which is a really great measurement as your businesses grow, right? Are you continuing to increase revenue per employee through the training that you're providing? And so that idea of revenue per employee, it's really one of the most important business measurements in manufacturing, especially in those companies that are in growth mode or high growth mode. Organizations that improve productivity without proportionality of increasing labor costs create tremendous competitive advantage for themselves, right? So when you think about somebody that can maintain revenue per employee as you grow your revenues, right? And you grow the number of people you have in your business so you can support more of your customers. When you maintain or grow that revenue per employee, it means that you're going to be way more profitable in the long run. So thinking about how do we do this idea of driving towards performance, it really is in a manufacturing environment, food processing environment, it's better trained operators. It's faster troubleshooting from your maintenance teams, better decision making from your frontline leaders, fewer mistakes from operators or others, less giveaway, right? Getting closer to on weight portions every single time, having more machine availability time than you do today. And then, really importantly, growing confidence in your employees to be able to operate at a higher level. When they can do that, when they have that confidence, they will give you more discretionary effort. And greater discretionary effort results in greater performance. What we find in high performing teams is, frankly, they give more effort, they try harder in the long run. So, all of these things improve operational output per employee, and the organizations that improve human performance faster will outperform the organizations that only invest in equipment. Machines matter, technology matters, AI matters, but sustainable productivity growth happens when people improve, every single day. So that's really how we think about driving performance. One of the reasons that traditional training often fails is because it was never designed to improve behavior. Research that we've done, research through the Association for Talent Development and several other organizations like Josh Burson and Associates, for example, their research is consistently showing that retention drops dramatically within 30 days following a training. Oftentimes, it drops to a level which is below 20% retention rates. In other words, 80% of what we may have taught someone in training will be lost within that 30-day period. And it's simple, right? It's why. Why does this happen? Because training is often very compliance focused instead of performance focused. Learning oftentimes is disconnected from the daily work that people are doing. If there's a little reinforcement, they'll retain more. So you have to find more reinforcement. You have to introduce what we refer to as training bursts following the training. They have to have sufficient practice time. Insufficient practice leads to the loss of that knowledge that they've gained. Or if they don't use the skills consistently that you've taught them, those skills will erode over time. So KPIs focused on attendance instead of operational outcomes have often been the driver of poor performance following training when you're really measuring performance on the plant floor. So when you're looking at things like yield giveaway, throughput, downtime events, OEE, you want to make sure that your behaviors are aligning to those things. If training doesn't improve those metrics, then what's probably happening is your organization isn't focused on behaviors or tasks that drive those metrics when they're doing training. And eventually, people will stop believing in training as a way to improve performance if you're not doing those things. Some other areas that we've looked at when it comes to adult learning is we really have to be focused on how and why will adults learn, and how does learning theory and operational performance intersect. And so we know adults will learn best when learning is relevant to them. It's focused on a problem. So when we think of problem-centered learning, what we're really talking about there is focusing on the problem that you're faced with in the plant and being able to address that problem through the learning that takes place. The way that we recommend people build learning plans today is really an assessment of what are all the problems that you're being faced with, and then where is your performance at, and then building back from what you understand your actual performance to be based upon those behaviors or tasks that need to change. We'll talk about a formula for that in just a few moments. When we also think about learning being immediately applicable to what they're doing, if you're doing training for someone and the learning that they're receiving isn't going to be immediately applied, in other words, maybe you're expecting a new piece of equipment to arrive in your plant, and that equipment isn't going to arrive for a month, and you invest in training your people 30 days ahead of time. If there's not reinforcement for what they learned, by the time the equipment arrives, they will have forgotten almost everything that was trained to them. So make sure that your learning is immediately applicable. It also has to be tied to real world outcomes. And when we talk about real world outcomes, what we're really talking about is how do people see the improvements that they're making? It's what we refer to as motivation through mastery. People will be more motivated to continue doing the right thing when they see that it has an impact. And so when you think about how do you reinforce this learning and the training that someone goes through, you have to make sure that when they do it right, they're receiving affirmations for that. Oftentimes I hear people tell me that they don't need affirmations. And to me, cognitively, that doesn't make sense, because we all need to know when we're doing a good job. We need to know what's expected of us. And when we can deliver on those expectations and we receive the praise and recognition that we deserve for doing a good job, it is motivating. And that motivation then leads to us doing more and more of that, and it becomes a level of mastery. One of the things I also want to mention is when we change the way that we design learning, instead of large generic training events, we encourage people to use micro learning. We've partnered with Workforge to create micro learning courses for us, and I'll show you an example of that in the webinar today. We also are very task-based reinforcement. And what I mean by that is when we have a task that someone needs to be able to complete as part of their job in the plant, we have to make sure that that reinforcement of that task is consistent. It'll become a habit for someone when it's reinforced. Simulations are a great way to learn, but scenario-based learning is important, but it's not the only thing, right? We have to have the ability to get people in front of the equipment, in front of the processes that understanding the processes they need to follow and actually do it in a live environment. Doing it in a classroom is nice, but until you do it in a live environment, you don't really demonstrate the level of skill that you need. So things like just-in-time support, coaching feedback or coaching loops, and then that KPI driven reinforcement, right? Where you're always talking about performance. What is the goal for today? What's our throughput goal for today, right? What's our yield goal for today? Did we hit those goals? That level of reinforcement, especially in a manufacturing environment, are so important to keep your workers motivated and in tune with what should they actually be doing? How do they make those behaviors the most important thing? So one way to describe that is learning has to become part of your operating system. And when you can do that, then your performance improves. We all are faced with these types of challenges. So when you think about this idea of labor shortages, right? The whole industry is faced with labor shortages. Our industry is being faced with experience gaps. Even as automation improves and we can have fewer people operating a full line solution, the experience gaps that people have is still significant because they're no longer doing a menial task. Now it's about how do I program machines to do the task that a person used to have to stand there and do. With automation like pickers and auto loading into packaging machines, those types of technology allow us to do things in a much faster and more consistent way than a human would be able to do it. But experience gaps still exist with people because you don't have people doing that anymore. You need to train them on how to operate the machines. We also have a need for rapid onboarding. Oftentimes, because of turnover, you have to get your people up to speed as fast as you can. So speed to proficiency in their role is a measurement that all training should be looking at. How fast can you get someone up to speed? And then what can you do to maximize that speed? Some things are going to take time. What's the right amount of time to take to get them up to the right level of skill and knowledge? Technology acceleration helps with this, but there's still skill transfer challenges that every organization faces. And so the organizations that solve workforce capability better will create a sustainable competitive advantage. It's interesting when you really think about what's been happening globally with humans and how we view productivity. You see this chart that I'm sharing on the screen now. You'll notice that it took 100 years for a 200% increase in productivity. If we go back and measure from the time the Transcontinental Railroad started until you get to the Model T and then the computer generated time. And then the next 200% increase was only 60 years. And then the next 200% increase was only 15 years. And so it's really interesting to me, this research that Burson and Associates has done and put together, and they're estimating in 2024, they came out with this that the next 200% increase in productivity was going to happen between 2024 and 2030. So 6 years for us to double productivity. So the question that I really think about all the time is where are we at with each one of our people in being able to double their level of productivity? Lots of tools exist to help you do this. But if you're not constantly thinking about what are we doing to improve the level of productivity that we have, then you're going to fall behind, right? It's this idea that productivity is increasing and the amount that people can generate is obviously increasing. And so the people who recognize this and address this trend, that's are going to be the people who end up winning in the long run, is how do we address these things? So when we think about productivity results and how do we get there, results only happen when behavior changes in a positive way and it's sustainable. And so when you think about this idea, this learning success formula that I'm sharing on the screen now, this idea of improved results, this is a metric. You can always look at any type of metric and say, all right, what do we need to do to improve that metric? So that metric might be machine availability time, it might be yield, or it could be throughput, whatever you choose. When you think about that metric and how you're going to improve that performance, you have to identify what positive change needs to take place in order for that improvement to take place. If you keep doing the same thing all the time, we know what you're going to get is going to be the same thing. In fact, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting something different. And so you can apply this to so many different things, even personally. I always like to think about this from how is Dave going to lose weight, right? If I need to improve my result, my scale needs to change and go down. There has to be some type of positive change that I make. And so maybe that behavior has to be I need to become more aware of what I'm eating or how I'm fueling myself. Maybe it's the task is I have to prepare my meals on Sundays so that I have a meal prepared for the rest of the week, right? It's those behavior changes can be applied to so many different things. Then we have to be able to look at the behavior. So when you identify the behavior or task, that's step one. Step two then is you have to be able to do an honest assessment. And that's the key word there. It has to be an honest assessment of what needs to change. And so when you think about these three areas, attitude, skills, and knowledge, we always look at the knowledge piece first. What do I know about the behavior? Can I define that behavior? Can I define the task that needs to be completed? When we think about the questions for a behavior, there's only, or for, excuse me, for knowledge of that behavior, there's only two. The first question is, can I define the behavior? The second question is, do I know why that behavior is important? If I can answer both of those, then I probably have the knowledge I need. Skills, on the other hand, then, is my ability to demonstrate that behavior in a live environment. And so skill building requires several different steps, and we'll talk about those steps on the next slide. Attitude is my willingness to implement that behavior. It might not just be it's not my attitude towards life in general, although that can have an impact. It really is my attitude towards this behavior. So when you think about training yourself, if you're like me and you recognize I need to do my meal preparation for the week, am I willing to do that? Or do I say, I'll just push that off and I'll just prepare my meal every morning and then the morning comes and you get busy doing other things and you go, oh, I'm just going to order that fast food again, right? So it's about willingness to do the right behavior or demonstrate the tasks that need to be done, right? And then your skill level in being able to do that. You'll notice we also have GP in here. This is the game plan. Sometimes we call this an LP or a learning plan. And this is the implementation plan for how am I going to make these things happen. When I have a plan and I can follow that plan, then I can expect the positive change to take place. That's how all of this comes together. And I encourage learning and development leaders to think about these things as they start to think about how do we build the right training and the right behavior changes that will impact that level of performance. And so we always talk about there's some design requirements that are required when you're building training. Those design requirements listed here, right? They have to become very objective based or preferably even problem centered. So as I mentioned before, when you identify a problem inside of your business, inside of your manufacturing plant, you might ask yourself, okay, here's the problem. What behavior or task needs to change in order to change that from being a problem to being a strength, right? And so when you think about those behavior or task changes to improve your performance, you also have to then deliver that to your learners in an engaging or motivating way for the learner, right? If they're told, hey, you just need to change this or else, guess what? They leave, right? That's a big driver for why so many people lose folks is because the way that they might approach the coaching and the development of that person doesn't align with what that person believes or wants to do. And then you also have to make sure that you're tying that back to that measurable KPI, whatever that key performance indicator is. If it's throughput that we're trying to impact, and we have to look at how fast can our line operate, where are, for example, our bottlenecks? When we can identify what's causing that bottleneck, we've now identified a behavior or a task that needs to be improved. Then we can build the training from that. When you think about learning productivity on the other side of this screen, right, it has to include some piece of self-paced knowledge transfer. In other words, you don't have to invest in having a facilitator teach the knowledge piece. Knowledge can be easily transferred through lots of different methods, including e-learning. And we have found e-learning to be especially beneficial to pass knowledge along. The skill development piece, there's 4 steps to any level of skill development, and those are listed here. And the idea of this is really important. This is where most training fails. If you don't follow all 4 of these steps, and you can probably think about examples that you've noticed in your own facilities, right? It has to start with someone doing it and you watching. If you're the learner, you're watching a mentor, a more proficient person complete that task or demonstrate that behavior. Then you can help them, right? And then the third step is you can actually do it and they would be there to help you. And then finally you can do it on your own and that person can just observe you. Another critical step to reinforcing learning until it becomes a habit is this idea of number 3, collaborative discussions. Oftentimes, the reason training is failing in the design of the way training gets done is we might do some great e-learning. We've transferred the knowledge we need. We bring people into the environment where they're going to be operating or maintaining the equipment, and we run through the skill development, and they gain that. And then we skip step 3. And if you skip step 3, that means you're not having enough of those discussions to reinforce the learning often enough. Sometimes I hear people say to me, Dave, how long do you have to do collaborative discussions for it to be really effective? And the answer is until the person that's been trained can repeat back exactly the steps they need to follow when they're trying to execute that behavior or demonstrate that task. And that's when you know that the habit development has taken place, right? Because they can consistently perform at the higher level that you need them to perform. In other words, the positive behavior change has taken place for a consistent period of time. That might be 30 days. It might be shorter, but oftentimes it's going to be 30 or more days in order for that habit to truly be able to be formed. So when you think about competency, competency is truly built through repetition, guided practice, coaching, reinforcement, and lots of feedback. It's not built through a single classroom event. Oftentimes, we have people that will want to schedule training because they aren't performing at a high level. And we begin that process and say, okay, what training should we be delivering if we haven't identified yet what the problem is and what behaviors need to change? There's no reason to do training. Training for training's sake becomes just that. It's a check the box event. It doesn't impact performance. And so if you start with performance and build your way backwards, you'll get much better results. You may be familiar with Malcolm Knowles, very famous for having written lots of different things in relation to adult learning. And the andragogy that Malcolm Knowles has published recognizes and proven through research that adult learners want relevance to the job. It's extremely important for them to be willing to learn. So when we have that problem-centered approach, it's relevant to them. They also want autonomy in their learning. They want to be able to learn at their pace. And so oftentimes when you have a big group and you have a large group together, you'll notice that there's a couple participants who will be more engaged in the learning, most likely because um, their 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 personality is just different. And so if they're extroverted versus introverted, that may be the way they interact and that may be the way that they learn. But how are you going to engage your introverted learners? Sometimes that has to be an individual level of engagement. And so autonomy to that is very important. They also have to be able to immediately apply what it is that you're teaching. So again, this idea that how do you make sure that the problem is going to be solved through the learning that takes place, and then you can actually go do it. And then problem solving is the factor that drives all of this together, along with collaboration, right? And so collaborating with other learners is a great way for them to learn, and then personal growth. We know that people find fulfillment in their work when they can grow their knowledge levels and they can contribute that knowledge and skill that they develop to others. That means that training must feel connected to real operational outcomes. Without that level of connection, training often fails. So, this is why Weber partnered with Workforge. At Weber, our expertise is centered around designing and building precision equipment, building automation, food processing operations, yield optimization, throughput improvements, reducing giveaway, ensuring those portions are perfectly weighed, increasing uptime, supporting customer profitability. We really understand the operational realities of our customers and those things that you all face every single day because we live in these environments. But we also recognize something important. Even the best equipment in the world cannot consistently perform at elite levels without highly capable people operating, maintaining, troubleshooting, optimizing, and leading around those systems. And that's where Workforge became a strategic partner. They specialize in manufacturing learning systems, adult learning design, workforce capability development, skill progression pathways, learning technology ecosystems, and operationally focused content development. Together, what we've been able to do, Weber and Workforge together, is we help bridge the gap between machine capability and workforce capability. So, because operational excellence is never just about equipment, it's about aligning the machines with the processes, with the right behaviors, the right skills that people have, the right leadership, and the reinforcement of those systems. That's what made our partnership powerful. It's the way we approach the challenge from two different but highly complementary perspectives, right? Weber brought deep industry expertise, the equipment knowledge, our focus on operational KPIs, our customers' pain points, and technology proficiency standards. And then what Workforge brought for us was the learning science, the adult learning methodology, how we scale content systems, manufacturing focused LMS capabilities, and a reinforcement and skill development strategy. And so together we moved beyond the traditional idea of training. And instead, that's how we began building learning ecosystems that are designed to improve measurable productivity. That change and that conversation is entirely what makes us different now. Instead of asking how many people completed training, we're now asking, did throughput improve? Did downtime decrease? Did yield improve? Did troubleshooting speed improve? Did confidence with the people improve? And how did we observe that? Did turnover decrease? Did operational consistency improve? It's different questions. It's not how many people attended. What did they score in their pre-test versus their post-test? Yes, those things are important, right? Getting people to attend the full session, making sure that they take a pre-test and a post-test. Those are standard, right? We have to do that all the time anyway. But if it doesn't tie back to productivity improvement, then the training wasn't successful. I believe this is the future of learning and development in all manufacturing. Training is no longer an event. It has to be part of the operational performance system. And just to share a quick example with you of what we saw when, and I'm going to play a video. There's no sound because I want to talk through this a little bit. But this, as you think about this idea of what we created, one of the major advantages was delivering learning in the flow of our work, not separate from work. So training didn't have to become a separate event. The type of information that you see here is how we focus on the learning. And so when you think about the idea of just training a basic level on packaging and talking about what happens when a packaging machine starts forming the film, right? Our ability to be able to deliver this in a micro learning mattered because the people that we are teaching this, whether it's an operator in a plant or a Weber field service technician that's brand new to the industry, it's an easy way for us to address what they see. And you'll notice on the screen, we have broken this into multiple smaller short modules. Then there's always the knowledge check that I mentioned before. And so when we think about the way that these systems work together, it's our ability to not only be able to see it, they can hear it, they can read it, and they can practice it. And then we can easily take this type of information and produce it in the language that's necessary for them to be able to learn it. One of the major challenges we have that our industry has is what are the languages that are being spoken in your plant? Developing all of this in English is nice, but it doesn't help when your workers are Spanish speaking or Polish speaking or French speaking or whatever language it is that they're speaking. We have to have the ability to transfer that learning into those languages. And so this is just one example of how we worked with Workforge to take some of this information and be able to share it in lots of different ways with our learners. I want to share what some real results could look like. And this is a example of one of the customers that we worked with. We established a baseline of how many sandwiches a week they were getting through from a throughput perspective. And what we did was we sat down and then figured out how do we build a program around the behaviors and tasks that needed to change in order to improve that throughput. We developed a 6-week program with weekly and monthly follow-up sessions. And we did some training with some of our facilitators at Weber, some of our learning consultants. And then we had additional people in the plant reinforce those things that we taught. And it was very machine specific, but it was also tied very closely to these behaviors that we needed. Then we looked at production levels every week following training, and we maintained looking at those production levels for several months. It became part of their habits, how they operated on a daily basis, then focusing on the productivity, the throughput that they needed. And after the training, they were able to improve their sandwich production by 49%. And most importantly, they were able to sustain that level of improvement. When we think about learning and development today, this is what learning should look like, right? What's the baseline? Where are we operating at today? What behaviors or tasks do we need to improve in order to operate at a higher level? Sometimes we don't know what that higher level is. So we have to look at what's the target, what's the objective that you have for that. So if you look at 350 sandwiches a week is the baseline we want to get to, that's great. How are you going to get there, right? If you don't know what your top level is, sometimes it's about daily incremental improvement and continuing to increase your productivity every single day. This didn't take place. This 49% increase didn't take place in a day, right? It was over a period of time, completing the full 6-week program and several months of reinforcement activities. And they were able to get to what they're able to do. And now they know their benchmark, right? The new benchmark for their productivity is the amount they were able to achieve and then maintain. And so that's a really important way to think about learning and development. So how do you build a learning and development strategy that really focuses on these results? Couple of things to reiterate. Focus on a problem-centered approach first. What are the challenges that you're facing? And then think back to that learning success formula because it's foundational to how you look at performance improvement. When you understand what change needs to take place and you identify that behavior or task, then you can assess by individual learner what is their knowledge, what is their skill level, what is their attitude or willingness. When you know those things and you couple that with a game plan to help them improve, to demonstrate the right behaviors, and it may be different for multiple learners. And so when you think about a team working together to improve performance, you may have some people that are operating at a very small level of being able to perform those behaviors and tasks. Or you may have some others that perform at a high level in those areas and they perform lower in another area. That's why it has to be as individualized as possible. And when you complete that learning with those folks, what you'll find is that the positive behavior change will take place when you have all of these elements aligned. That's the best way to think about how do you do this. And so to give you something you can take away immediately, 4 steps to do that. And we'll share these slides with some notes following the session. But number 1, what is the business outcome that's most important for you to correct or improve, right? That's the operational problem that you need to identify. Then you have to define what those behaviors are that are driving that issue. So map your challenge back to the success formula. Build learning around those behaviors, right? It may be a behavior, it might be a task, but identify what those are and build your learning around those. And then ensure that you're measuring outcomes relentlessly. This is the hardest part. Many people think is the hardest part. It's really not when you're talking about performance every single day, right? You're probably already having conversations about how you're performing from one day to the next. When you start thinking about what was the behaviors that drove our results yesterday and what were the things we were lacking behavior or task wise that didn't allow us to reach our objectives or we could have done better in, right? That's when you know that you can start to build learning from that. And all of a sudden, learning then becomes part of your productivity system. It's not a learning event. It's not an HR event. It becomes part of your daily operational activities. So we have a few minutes left. I've got about 8 to 9 minutes, and I want to be able to take a few questions. Um, see if we have any questions in the chat. Jennifer, I can't see the regular chat for some reason. Do we have any questions that have shown up in the chat?
No, we do not.
All right. Um, One of the questions that I often hear from people is how do you actually measure whether training improved productivity and not just completion rates? And so this is a question I get often when I talk about this with our customers. And so I think you have to start with we're not going to measure training other than measuring it by performance. So using a traditional metric like completions or attendance, it doesn't tell you whether things actually changed on the plant floor, which is where we're looking to make these changes. So we start by identifying the very specific operational metrics we're always trying to influence, those things that we've mentioned, whether that's yield or giveaway or throughput or uptime. From there, you can establish a baseline for where are you operating at today, and then you can build the training that you need to build. And so oftentimes that's where we see people not being able to measure results. And so that measurement of results, it has to be the center line of where you start. We often get other types of questions. So if you have questions that come up and your thoughts after this, you can always reach back to Jennifer at FPSA and she can pass those questions along to me. As we close, I just want to thank you for your time today. I believe very strongly that the future belongs to organizations that develop people faster, that reinforce learning better, that align learning to operational metrics, and that sustain performance consistently. And at Weber Academy and through our partnership with WorkForge, our goal is really simple. It's to transform learning into measurable operational performance and get our industry to adopt those as the standards for learning. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Jennifer. Appreciate the opportunity to share, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Really, your expertise and practical insights were very useful. We greatly appreciate you pushing our audience to think differently about how the equipment, processes, and people work together to drive operational performance. So thank you. It was very valuable. We'd also like to extend a special thank you to WorkForge for partnering with FPSA and making today's webinar possible. Thank you, WorkForge. We greatly value your partnership. Before everyone signs off, I encourage you to join us for our next webinar Wednesday on June 24th, featuring Parker Freeze Dry. There, we'll be exploring freeze drying technology and its growing role in food manufacturing. As Dave mentioned, we're happy to entertain any follow-up questions about today's session. Please just email us at info@fpsa.org. Thank you again for joining. We appreciate your participation and look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great day.